Okay, so now we get to the good stuff, atomic design. So whereas before I had my components and they're all just thrown just wherever, here you can see that I've organized them now into atoms and molecules and organisms, and I think I mentioned this. Atoms are your most basic building blocks. These are like, I'll just show you here. I have it like buttons, an icon, a text input. These are your simplest components, and they would be ideally you don't want them to have any kind of logic in them, because the logic should come from the top layer of your application and then pass it down. This helps to improve the readability of your code, the reusability, and also most importantly the testability of your code. When you have components that are they have their own space, when they're isolated, it just makes the whole application easier to read and more manageable. So these are the atoms, and you take atoms and you form them together to get your molecules. In this case, I have the header and the to entry and the to item. Molecules then build up to form organisms. In this case, I have a list. Now, is this the best example of an organism? I don't know. A lot of these examples may seem a little bit contrived, and they may not even be the best examples, but you have to envision, like I said, a bigger application where you would be able to categorize these components more accurately. Organisms give you online, these are called templates. I call them blocks here. And blocks are, I can't say, I don't want to say they form together to give you a page, because essentially a block many times is the implementation of a page. You can think of it, or template is the implementation of a page. So you might wonder why even separate these two if they're almost the same thing. I guess one reason is because you can have different blocks within a page that you render them conditionally. So I don't know what a good example would be. If you have a page and the page looks one way for an authenticated user and a different way for a non-authenticated user, then you'd have blocks for each of those and then render them conditionally based on who's logged in. So that's one example. And then pages, and then I also have something called layout, which is essentially just this, and it's a way to encapsulate your, I don't want to say entire application, because you can have more than one layout, but it is a very high level organizing of your application. And so if we go inside, this doesn't all look like my previous examples. I think the modifications I made a week after, so some things might be different, but anyway, I have a header and a to-do page. So when you have a page, this header, I'm kind of thinking of it like a nav bar. It's not, though. It's just a title essentially. But if you had, for example, an account here, a profile, and you had like a menu drop down here, wouldn't the menu drop down be here? Yeah, I don't know what it. I don't know. Anyway. Then you would have, I guess, a set of molecules. You'll have one here, you would have one here, and then you'd have one there. And these would then form in an organism. That would be a better example of an organism rather than the list that I had here. So right now I'm calling this a molecule because there's only this one component here. But if there was a few things happening here and this was like a nav bar, then that's a great example of an organism. So that's why I have this here, because if I had different pages, they would all still render the same header. Anyway, going into this guy, we're into the to-do page here, and this has a lot of the logic, and it is a bigger file. I say bigger, not big. It's still not a lot of code here, but if you had a bigger application, then if you're dumping all your logic into that one file, or a lot of it into that one file, then of course it is going to be pretty big. As you can see, the logic involved in clicking to do, toggling, deleting. It's all coming from this top layer and then getting passed down via props. This is better than prop drilling. This is not prop drilling. Prop drilling is when you have a prop that the parent has essentially no use for. It needs to pass it along to its children, so it goes through that chain. But this is a nicer way of doing it, because these nested props get used by the child's child, and it's just a neater way of organizing things. Many times the block will be pretty much the whole page. Okay, so going in the block, I have some default props, but for the most part, there's not a lot happening here. All the logic, like I said, was in the parent component, and now this is this is a much simpler component. It's very it's easier to read, easier to test, and that's pretty much the main benefit of organizing your code this way. One is it's easier to also reason about what things are. Like if again, you have to envision that you have like maybe 100 components here, and they're all compartmentalized in these thingamajigs. And so if I just click on molecules, each of these components, I have a rough idea what it is just by the fact that it's a molecule. Same with atoms. I have like a rough idea. My button must be very simple, must be like one HTML component or element, sorry. And without even going into it, I know that whether it's something I need or how it relates to the rest of the application. And if you go into these, it's the same sort of thing happening, where there's not a lot of, or not really any logic. I have default props, but none of these are being really used. It's all being passed down from the parent component. And then that makes this component reusable. I don't know where else you would use this to. Well, you could probably use it somewhere, but it is reusable, and that's also a big plus. And then these, you have your atoms, and I'm not going to go through each one of them, but as you can see, they are pretty dumb, and that's a good thing. That's what you want. You don't want a lot of logic here. You want it to be very simple. And how I organized the button in terms of styling is I can pass in certain props and then style it accordingly. So I have this style prop, and depending what the value is of this style, I'll have an associated class in my SAS file. So that makes styling very easy too. Makes it easier to customize your styling depending on which props are being passed down. I posted the code so you can go through it and how things are organized and how it's different from the previous way it was structured. But I want to move on to the last thing, which is VIPER. So that will be in the next video.